Do it.
All right, so I guess it says we're live. So I'm here with my cousin John Bell, and I'm streaming on my channel, the Almond Tree channel, and Jacob's channel. And I tried asking Jacob. He told me he's probably busy right now. He told me a while back that it went one night whenever I can to stream to his channel as well. And I know there hasn't been much as at least not as much activity as there was going on has been on his channel lately. So I thought I didn't hear back from him, so I'm kind of taking my own liberty and doing this on my own. So I want to preface this whole conversation with saying that these are not Jacob's ideas, and this is not even Jacob approved right now. I just kind of did it, but I thought he'd probably me rather do it, stream it to his channel than not. So yeah, that's why we're here. So if and we kind of have a topic. I titled it Predestination and Propositions because John had brought up. Well, we've been in on the Signal app. We've been in a private chat, kind of going back and forth on these ideas. And John had mentioned that he'd like to dig into them a little more, but maybe come at them from a different angle. And whoever, so I'll let him kind of explain that in a second. But whoever would like to join us as well, I put a link. I'll put it there one more time in the comment section, so you can click the link and hop on if you want. And anyone is more than welcome to join. So, all right, John. So, do you want to?
Cool.
I figure you can probably say how you wanted to. I liked what you said, how you wanted to approach the question of predestination, and I guess all the other stuff we've been talking about, and just why. I didn't know if you could articulate that better of why you
I
want to
don't
dig into
know how well I can. I feel a lot of pressure because I know this is being live streamed. It'll be recorded,
Well,
Every
I
dumb
don't know if
thing
you
I
can see it,
say.
but in the top left corner, we only have one person watching, so don't tell him.
Oh, phew.
If I would have
Oh,
titled this Bible study, then we probably would have less. So
that's
but,
true. You gave it
yeah,
a good title.
yeah.
So I'm just going to try to approach this as if it's just you and I chatting, right?
Yeah.
Like what we used to. So, um, the Signal app and the conversations that we're having, um, the way that I have a personal tendency to interpret a lot of the discussion that goes on is I tend to avoid discussions based on semantics alone. So when the discussion seems to be throwing around terms, I don't know what to do with that. It feels like there's not a whole ton of meat to it. Um, and so what I was trying to explain to you a little bit earlier today was, and I don't know if I'm going to do a good job articulating it again or not. But it was that I personally enjoy talking about philosophy and theology as a means to an end to understand the objective truth a little bit better. And I think for most, that's probably the case. But I know for some, it becomes this playground where you can play with ideas and you can see patterns. But then for me personally, there's that last step where you see a pattern, you recognize that you're charting this map and you have this territory, but what does it mean? Um, and why does it matter? I guess is kind of the question that I always come back to. And so when I made that comment to you this morning, I was on my way to the rock climbing gym, and it was pretty early in the morning, and I was just driving alone, and I was thinking about this predestination conversation that was kind of going on, and it was pretty lively. I think we had Peter in one corner and Mitch in the other, and
Gets a little
squaring off,
catty.
and it was a little catty. That,
I'm
by
just
the way, what you said about how you're going to go hang out with the dogs because it was too catty,
because
that
they're
was
outside the
hilarious.
city.
That's so funny.
They're
Um, yeah, I thought that was great. So, man, it's not like I'm proposing a new angle or anything. I
yeah,
just
I know.
was letting you know that the way that I like to approach those things is I love to learn more about the world and about patterns and about the nuances and the things that tie them together in philosophy, because I think what that does is it's self-evident and it is representative of the creator that put all of that into place, right? So for me, I don't see much of a point unless I'm making that final connection. And so with predestination, um, there's an answer to it, but people have been debating it for thousands of years. And so I don't expect us to come to an answer. I expect us to have a pretty good conversation and ask questions. Um, but God does operate in some way, right? Whether we're predestined or not, or some weird hybrid of the mix, something happens. And so the way that I told you I would like to have a discussion about this is from the standpoint of really just truth seeking. Um, like honestly
Yeah.
just truth seeking. I don't
Yeah.
want
Yeah.
to try to flex anything that I know. I don't want to try to use big words. Like just from a point of humility, that's what I'm here to do. So I
Yeah.
didn't articulate that as well as I did to you earlier, but so it's nothing new
Yeah.
or
Well,
revolutionary. It's just
well, I kind of would like to, I mean, like we mentioned before we started this anyway, to kind of maybe start off with prayer as well, because one thing that you had mentioned that I really liked was, um, when it comes down to it, it's like I don't know. It kind of sound. This is what it sounded like to me. Maybe I heard it a little bit wrong too. But there's even with our last conversation with the Signal group and everything, when we talked about revival, it's just kind of sorry, there's a message that popped up here. Whatever. Okay. I think it's fine. But so it's kind of just like you just want to know God better. Like how does this even help of me knowing God better or me knowing the other person better? And like Luke and I mean sorry, well Luke was in there. We're all involved in the Signal chat. But Peter and Mitch and them going back and forth, like they're getting to know each other better that way too. But it kind of can
yeah.
become more of a almost like a debate-ish type thing where it's like there was one point where Craig even said like we need a little bit more dialogue or dialogos here and
Yeah. Yeah.
because you want to actually I don't know, and even so I guess the reason I mentioned the revival thing too is just like and I noticed this with myself a lot too, is even in getting in these conversations where we're talking about philosophy, theology, all this stuff, psychology, whatever it has to be, there's just moments where I just especially moments when you find sorrow where you're just like I don't care, like I just want to like fall on my knees at this point and like what like because all this stuff like didn't necessarily even get at the heart. It's like we're talking in
Mm,
circles around what the heart of it truly is. And so
mm,
what is the purpose of what we're doing is like there's moments where I just want to kind of throw all that away and just find myself like on my knees praying or something or
mm.
um yeah, and so getting to know I guess finding God more and getting to know God better. Oh my gosh, this man graced us with his presence.
Oh
Oh,
my gosh.
haven't seen this
I
guy
am so
ever.
lucky.
Hey guys, can you hear
We're
me?
talking about you.
I
Yeah, yeah,
can.
yeah.
Are you in heaven?
Okay, yeah. That's the problem. Is I wanted to tell you guys my my camera has been malfunctioning lately, and this is the way it chooses to malfunction. In a few
Okay.
minutes, I probably will appear, but it usually takes like 3 to 5 minutes for it to start
That's
working.
fine.
I would like to say this is because Mitch dropped his phone in the toilet.
Ah,
No,
very nice.
I'm joking. I'm joking. It was that's
No,
slander.
I
It was.
didn't
It did get
actually.
water. It did get water damage though,
I
but
like to think
it's
that
not because.
Mitch died recently and heard us saying that we're going to pray for some revelation, and here he is joining our stream yard
Yeah, yeah. With the
from the
angel
great
of light.
beyond. Yeah.
With the goods, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
So I
Jason,
guess
I
I
kind
mean,
of I wanted
go
to
ahead.
add on real quick to what you were saying. I think you were exactly right. I think there is one caveat though, and it's while I do love to focus on getting to know God better, there's been a lot of moments in my own life where, and all throughout Scripture, where you only see the connection or the direct relation to how this ties into describing the character of God after the fact. So I don't think that learning for the sake of learning is lost just because you don't have, just because it's not obvious, right?
Mhm. Yeah, that's good.
So I think there's a lot of
Really,
merit to it.
yeah, that's a really good thing to say, for sure. Well, did one of you guys want to pray, or do you want me to pray? Or
I'll let you
I
pray,
don't
Jason,
mind
if you
doing
want.
it. All right, we should make Mitch since he's the angel, but whatever. All right, Father, I come before you right now. I just thank you for this time. We get to set aside, and we ask that you help to direct our eyes towards the truth, towards your truth, towards you. We just want to seek to know you better and to know our brothers better and to find some reconciliation with all these different ideas. And, we admit and we acknowledge that a lot of these things are too lofty for us. And we ask that you help to lift our mind and lift our eyes to see the way that you see and to hear the way that you hear and to hear with your heart. And we ask that you help us to pursue love in all things. And in your name we pray. Amen.
Hmm.
Nice. So does anybody?
Thanks,
I
Jason.
know you grabbed your Bible, John. Does anybody have any scriptures around this, or we could start going down the predestination topic if you want, and we don't have to even deal with scripture. That's not. It's just totally up for grabs. I don't know where we're going with this.
I don't know, Mitch. Do you have
All right.
anything?
What are your thoughts, Mitch?
On what?
On wait. Um, well, we were. I don't know if you caught the beginning, but me and John. Well, John messaged me this morning and mentioned the idea, like how we had talked about predestination, and even the other topic too that keeps coming up is propositional truth, things like
Oh,
that.
yeah.
And but we were saying like we kind of want to come at them from an angle of like, does this even help us like at all? Like, what are we debating this for? Is it to know God more? Is it are we just kind of why are we wrestling with these truths? Like, I guess kind of what's the why behind it? Trying to get at the heart of it more than just kind of, uh, I guess, debating what could be what.
Jason, I
It's
never
like,
heard. I haven't had the chance to listen to what you said. What was your answer?
I'm totally fine with predestination, but that's kind of because I'm a universalist. Uh, so you know, I could save my answer. My answer, I think, where I would go with it is I would say judgment begins at the house of God, and if God lives, if you want to say like we're all made in His image, and there's kind of God or Christ in you, then that you're predestined to be made in His image. So, and when like if you naturally have a child, it's like you want the best for them. They're going to be born in your image, but then you want them to grow almost into a greater image than you yourself are. But with that comes the judgment. So you're like already predestined to be damned because you're being called into something you can't live up to. But that's almost like uh, a compassion or a mercy on God, because it's like if you reached it, you would just reach stasis and there'd be no more. So it's like He's always calling. This is what love does. Like, it always calls you to grow more. So it's always kind of in that way you're judged and um, kind of damning you in a sense. It's always kind of judging you, or it at least can feel like that, because it's always saying it's pulling more potential out of you and trying to bring you to your fullest potential, which is infinite. So it's like it's always going to be uh, calling you into almost like a greater perfection. But then at the same time, this is why I kept saying that judge is the advocate, because then at the same time, love just keeps like undergirding you. So it's always calling you higher, and it's kind of always like judging you and holding you to this ideal you can't reach, and you don't ever necessarily want to reach it because you always want to keep growing. But then at the same time, it's continually pushing you along and lifting you up further into that ideal. So in that way, I'd say like, even the idea that God chooses chooses some to be damned and some to be, for salvation. It's like, yes, but it's both. Like it's both of you, or something like that is what I would say. Like it's that's how I would see it. Is like, yeah, he's chosen me because, and damned kind of sounds like a little bit rough, I guess. But it would say like, but I guess in that sense it makes sense because it's your judge. Mitch, I think I'm getting a little bit of an echo. I don't know why. No, you're fine. I think it sometimes if you have the YouTube open still, it'll be an echo in the other browser, but I don't know.
Yeah, I could hear that too a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
Is it still echoing?
I think it's fine now. I think
it fixed.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so I don't know. That's how I would see it. Because I would say like, yeah, judgment begins at the house of God. So the judgment is like, I don't know. That just seems to me like if God is love, that's the best way to describe God is love. It's like that's what love is always doing. It's kind of always burning away the chaff, you would say, and at the same time like heal. It's always kind of wounding and healing you at the same time. But I could be. That's just how I would say. So what are your thoughts on that?
I don't know. I got to be honest with you. I don't know where I land with the idea of universalism, to be completely honest.
That's
and I think
totally fair.
That's the discussion in which predestination kind of rests inside. I don't know. I haven't been convinced of it. I haven't been convinced of it the other way too.
Yeah.
I'm gonna.
Well,
my biggest thing. Oh, sorry. Please.
No, I was going to say like even being on Jacob's channel, Jacob I don't think believes in universalism either, and I think he said one point like that they believe at least one person will go to hell just because like there has to be that it has to
imagine being the one.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Absalom, right? Sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No. There still is a tiny bit of an echo, but it's not that bad, Mitch. Just letting you know. Or it might be me.
I hear it a little bit. It's not as bad as it was though.
Yeah, it's a lot better. All right, all I was gonna say was there are so I want to tie this to the work that I do. So I'm an engineer, and I basically just design stuff that's made, stuff to fly, stuff to go into space, and the stakes are really high. So if you do one thing wrong, you've effectively negated years of work. And universalism, me accepting that idea is kind of the same thing. So when I come up with an engineering design or something, I'm always really skeptical because I know that I don't know what I don't know. And I know that there are things that I don't understand that drive the design criteria that, that are significant and you can't look over. And so with universalism, I understand logically the idea of God being perfect love and love pushing you, and how can God, create eternal judgment. I understand that logically, but there's like a part of me that is skeptical that I'm oversimplifying something. And it's the same way that I think if I do some sort of engineering design and it works out right the first time, or it makes logical sense, my tendency is to think there's probably something I'm not accounting for here, because if I send out this design or if I accept this theology, that is radically, fundamentally changing the way that I view the entire world, And so that's my personal hesitancy with it. I don't know, Mitch, do you have anything to add?
Are you guys, is it echoing too much?
No,
No.
I'm just glad you're here.
Yeah, no, it's great to see your face. Is that who
Yeah,
I
I
think
have
it
a lot
is?
of technical
In the
issues, but are you
background?
talking about? It's my cat. It's not my child.
Oh, okay. Oh.
Are you guys talking about universalism or predestination?
Well, we were talking about predestination, and then I'm not sure if you heard because the technical issues, but I was saying that I kind of gave my take on it, and it. That's the thing I run into the problem with too is I feel like sometimes I feel like I'm cramming all these ideas into universalism to like make them fit, and I'm just like, is that what I'm doing? But then at the other time, I'm like, well, it seems to make more sense to me that way. Like it doesn't. I wrestle with these questions, and then when I wrestle with them in this way, that's the only way I know how to articulate them. So it kind of, we were talking about predestination, and then John asked me what my thoughts were on it, and then I said because I tend to see things this way now. I believe in predestination, but I believe that when people say this one is chosen, if you say God chooses to be damned and chooses to be saved, I would say, well, yeah, he chooses both on you because that's just what love does. uh, but then that was kind of my take on it. So but then that kind of led into the universalism topic as well, so we can go either route you want, predestination or universalism, whichever one
Well, it seems
you got
hard to
thoughts on.
separate the two.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, it seems like when you bring up predestination, it's either Calvinism or universalism. It's kind of like it might boil, but I could be wrong in saying that.
It's interesting that the topic of predestination always ends up, well, I guess what I'm trying to say is you say that everything is predestined, right? But it comes down to the salvation thing. Uh, uh, I guess it's because, I don't know. That's where I would go if I were trying to push back against predestination. I would say, so you're telling me that God that you said is good is damning people outright from the beginning. So I guess I don't know why it goes there so often. Or perhaps it's because predestination, the word in the Bible, is used in the context of salvation. I don't know enough about that. But I guess it's really about whether God is sovereign over all things or not. And that would include the will of man, which I tend to think. The reason it got brought up, I think,
Sorry, it's glitching up
yesterday
pretty bad. Wait, I
is
think it might be all right
because,
now.
yikes. Well, if it keeps glitching up, I'll just tap out. But the reason I think it got brought up, well, kind of all theological roads lead to predestination because it's just so juicy. But I wanted to bring it up. I said about it yesterday, which was kind of an inane statement. I said that all Christians believe in predestination. And the reason I said that is because I have this feeling that more often than not, the thing we're decrying or writing off, uh, predestination is kind of in some circles, uh, for an example, a theological concept that went off the rails, kind of some warped exegesis. My thought is that usually the things we're trying to write off figure into our own conception of reality somehow. That's the only reason I even want to explore it. It's sort of beaten to death. I mean, it's not that it has lost interest, but it just always gets talked about.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. I see. I guess maybe here's where I don't know, and maybe this is why I'm wrong because maybe I need to look at a more collective idea of predestination because, where you mentioned everybody believes in predestination, And where my mind immediately went was like, well, that seems kind of obvious, or you'd just be not, you'd fall into nihilism, right? Because you would kind of believe you have some sort of destiny. Like, what is all this for? Like, there's some sort of, right? Or am I like thinking about those words wrong? Like, do I not need to associate destiny with predestination? I thought that was kind of the idea.
I think you would actually flip it, Jason. I feel like if you really believe everything is predestined, that is what would lead to nihilism.
Why? Can you say more about that?
Because then it doesn't matter what you do. If you're predestined to go to hell, it doesn't matter if I share the gospel with you. If I'm predestined to go to heaven, it doesn't matter what I do, I'll end up there.
Yeah, I guess
almost
I just
think
always
that
go ahead.
Protestantism is a antidote to nihilism in a way. Free will is kind of an antidote.
Well, that's really interesting. It's kind of a Protestantism came along and was kind of almost trying to heal a wound or something like that. Is what you're. That's really interesting.
I mean, maybe.
I
don't understand Christian nihilism, so.
Well,
we have the expert online.
We have the expert. Well, I guess because maybe this is where I'm wrong. My mind immediately goes to like back to Genesis 1, and it says God made man in his image. So I think I just associate that with every man, that's their destiny, and I don't necessarily associate a destiny of being damned. I guess I would think this is my destiny. I can deny it if God gives me free will. Like that's probably the most I would go. Say God has destined me to be further and further growing into his likeness and his image. But in giving me a free will, he's given me the opportunity to deny that destiny. That's just where my mind always goes. But I see what you're saying. If I actually think, well, God just doesn't want me. He created me as just like, a pile of trash or something like that. Then it would lead me to just, fall into nihilism or think nothing matters. I am still getting a little bit of an echo, but it was fine. I don't know what happened. You got anything to say on, Mitch?
So what do you mean by damnation, Jason? So I think when Mitch is talking about damnation and when you're talking about damnation, you're talking about two separate things, it seems like, because Jason, you're talking about damnation in terms of it being a stepping stone in the cycle of what love does to you. And
I don't.
Mitch, it sounds like you're talking about a definitive
that works for
damnation,
me.
Right?
I think any definition you want to use of damnation is gonna work out in the predestination paradigm, because it all comes down to God's sovereignty. If you're damned for 20 minutes as a discipline, you were predestined to be damned, right? For those 20 minutes.
It
just depends how you think about God's sovereignty, how much control he's exercising. And of course, the interplay between man's will and his will, that's kind of impossible to really figure out. We just have to conceptualize it as best we can.
Yeah, I don't see much difference between, I guess, how people, like when they talk about damnation, it almost seems like creation or something. Like even talking about the fires of hell, it's like the burning fire that's I'm burning away the chaff or something like that. Like when Mitch, when you brought up the idea of being forgotten by God, that sounds to me like way worse. Like
I agree.
Because Job cries out. There's a few places in the Bible where it repeats this refrain, like "What is man?" and they're asking this question, "What is man?" But when Job mentions it, he's like, "Why don't you just leave me alone? Like why are you making me suffer?" And it's like, he scourges every son, chastens all his. It would be worse if he didn't. Like think of the alternative. Like what if you were just forgotten by God? To me, that would be worse. And so I don't know.
Look, this video that was shared. In the video, a guy was saying that he had defected from the faith because he believed that, not because he didn't believe in God, but he believed that he wasn't chosen by God. And this disturbed him to no end, and he eventually apostatized. And to me, that kind of just tracks, because if there is such a thing as an elect, however it is you conceptualize it, being elect is a good thing, and not being elect is a bad thing. So you should be very afraid that you're not elect. I don't know, the concept's there. As to what it means, even if we don't fully know, we know being elect is a good thing, and not being elect is a bad thing.
Why do you say that?
So just contextually, if you're looking at something like Romans 8, so
I was going to say the book of
elect,
Romans, yeah.
the elect are those that
Well-
are justified, and the apophatic
But that's not.
thing in there is,
Go ahead.
well, the opposite would be to not be justified. That doesn't sound very good.
But why is it that
So-
you're elect to be justified?
I don't know why. I just know that being elected to be justified is better than not being elected and not being justified.
Well, that's a
And
good
so-
argument.
However did you conceptualize it, being elect is a good thing, and not being elect is a bad thing. And so it makes
Well,
sense to be terrified that you're not elect.
Well, the reason I ask is because that's not how it's in my experience of life. Like, I don't think I'd always want to be elect.
Well, in this
because,
context,
I don't want to be president. Like, if it's in terms of like,
you don't, but you do want to be justified.
yeah,
In this
but
context, the elect is the good thing.
do you want to be judged, though?
Not in every
That's kind of
context, but in this.
in this at the very. So you're talking about the very, very, very like base level of being elected for something like salvation or forgiveness or something like that. Being chosen for that.
Yeah. In the case that it's usually talked about, I guess, it's the elect being justified.
So let's dig down that way
or
then.
you
So
hear somewhere else, like in Matthew 24, it says, "For the sake of the elect, I'm going to spare these bad things." So it feels like in the New Testament, the elect is always on the positive end of things.
yeah, I think that's fair. To me, I just feel like I guess in my mind it scales up. Like I would think like you're elected for. I mean, I think of elected officials. You know, like in God even says like multiple times in the scriptures, there's thrones and courts were seated and like a divine council, and it's like, do you want to be on that divine council? Where are you being elected to? Because I think of offices, I guess is what I'm saying. And that's why I was saying, like, if we dig down, like the way you're going, at the most fun, like, I guess the very being elect as being in just being a child of God would be like the very first thing or something like that. And it's like, what is that? You're elected for forgiveness or elected for
That would figure into it because you get that bit about being justified, which seems to relate to forgiveness.
Yeah. But then what do you do when he says you've judged yourself unworthy? Like, to me, that I guess it just circles back around to me of just like the only people that don't get forgiveness are those who reject forgiveness, who aren't forgiving, because you would judge yourself unworthy by just rejecting the very fundamental thing that reality needs,
Yes.
you yourself need.
Yeah, there's lots
then
of
it doesn't
ways
necessarily seem like God's picking and choosing at that point. I mean, it kind of is. It seems like he creates the frame or the pattern, and then you get to choose whether you want to partake or something. But I could be wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, once you get into God's will and how it interacts with man's will, it's very tricky, and I would say pretty much impossible. Although we do have to kind of create a conception of it. So, Yeah, I mean, I guess we all have our own model for thinking about that. But I think regardless, the elect is a good thing in the context of the New Testament. When it comes to whenever it's talking about God's elect, that's a positive place to be.
So I'm looking here at I'm looking here at Romans
Oh man,
11.
we're going into Romans on Jacob's channel. My goodness. No, I'm just kidding. Romans 11.
Romans
Romans
11.
9. Romans
Yeah.
9 is where you want to be. That one's Romans 11's. I don't know
Romans
if you
11
have
is
to go
good
the
too.
other.
So it's talking about Israel's rejection. And it says, "What then? Israel has not obtained what it seeks, but the elect have obtained it, and the rest were blinded. Just as it is written, God has given them a spirit of stupor, eyes that they should not see, and ears that they should not hear to this very day." And David says,
Yeah.
"Let their table become a snare and a trap, a stumbling block and recompense to them. Let their eyes be darkened, that they do not know what they see, and bow down to their back always." So I just kind of wanted to add on. I completely agree with you, Mitch, that it is good to be elect, but it is very clear that it is also bad to not be elected.
Yeah. I don't, man. I mean, I don't know. I've been through this with you guys so much where I'm like, I feel like I've just end up repeating myself and harping on the same thing because I'm just like it's like a perpetual mercy machine. Like if you read on, it's like those who he is just describing, who you just read about, are actually going to receive greater mercy in the end. But it's through the elect. So the ones that are choosing mercy now are going to later have mercy on those. And the only reason those fell was so these others could have mercy. So it's all like weird connection of that.
Yeah, that's right. That's why I said it doesn't matter how it turns out or what the duration is. You still don't want to be in the position of being blinded, of being in the place where you're separated from God, being in a place where you're suffering at His hand.
Correct.
Even if the outcome is good, ultimately, the elect is the catbird seat.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. I mean, I wouldn't want to walk around in blindness either. I feel like I've done that already a lot of times. I'm probably still doing that to a large degree. But how was this? So if you're going back to the original idea and tying in predestination, I guess the idea would be that some would claim that God created some just to be blind, just to walk around.
At the very least, He created some. And here's the trick. I mean, we might want to get into what we think about God's omniscience, because
Omniscience
that's
or omnipotent?
omniscience in this case,
Uh,
because
Okay. Yeah.
that's going to figure into when He created him. Uh, was it with the purpose? Did He know the beginning from the end? And between the beginning and the end, um, were some destined to suffer for however long, um, uh, because they're not the elect. Um, if yes, you don't want to be not the elect, and it should cause you grief if you're not. Not that I think you could really know in this life necessarily. There's like a wheat and a tare kind of thing here. You can be in a position to be. I mean, not that I think that you could really know, but it should terrify you that you wouldn't be. The prospect that you wouldn't be should terrify you. It cause you to say, "Have mercy on me, a sinner."
Yeah, and Jason, what you were saying, it is. I know what you're saying about it being a perpetual mercy machine. That's hard to say. Mercy
Yeah.
machine. But in the context of the elect, like what Mitch is talking about, I think I agree with Mitch in that the fact that you specifically would have the foresight to understand that you are suffering on behalf of those later, or you are being moved by love, and it is the cycle that happens, that is evidence that you are the elect. And so it to actually I think if you're really blind to it, you wouldn't know that's going on. And so it's an absolutely terrifying thing. So I think it's easy to say that it is perpetual mercy on the outside because you see what's going on. But if you're really blind, you don't even see that at all. If that makes
Yeah.
sense.
No, I think that makes sense because you don't want to be delusional or like where the verse that it's in its New Testament as well that stands out to me is God will send them a spirit of stupor that they should believe the lie because they didn't have love for the truth.
Yeah.
And so and so if I'm thinking about like Sodom and Gomorrah or something, like I wouldn't want to be growing up there and being taught all the wrong things. Hey Sherry, you should hop in here if you want. The link's there if you want to join us. But yeah, if so like I wouldn't want to be like growing up thinking, yeah, it's better to oppress people. Like I'll just bite and devour, take what I can get. That's how it's a dog eat dog world. And I wouldn't want to live that way. I'd rather be taught a better way to live. But then at the same time, it's just I don't know. You see them later on they're not forgotten. Like it's just and they're justified because of I don't know. I wouldn't want to be blind. I get that, and that's a terrifying thought. But at the same time, it's like even to the degree of how much I see, that's what I'm held accountable for. So to all the degrees I am blind, there will be mercy in it. But I would rather have the other. But part of me thinks that is just because we make ourselves blind. We stop up our ears and blind our own eyes. Like I think there's that. I mean, that's how I see it. But I guess it gets into the predestination thing. It's like and the Bible it kind of talks about both. I guess you could argue, well, some are born blind, like just naturally. Some people are born blind, and then other people are, so you could say, well, God created them blind. It's God's doing. But then at the same time, you have scriptures where it says like they've willfully blinded their eyes and stopped up their ears and done all this stuff. And so, and then that is, I guess, going back to not having a love for the truth. And so it gets to this point where you're just kind of given the strong delusion, or something like that. I don't know. I feel like I just talked in a big circle and didn't make any sense.
No. That makes sense. And I might be distilling this down to a level that is unreasonable, but I mean, you kind of alluded to it already. So you brought up Sodom and Gomorrah as an example, and I think that's a good one. And you said it would have been terrible to have been brought up in an environment where that was the norm, and really you didn't know any better. Um, and I understand that at a macro level, grace abounds and mercy is magnified, right? To somebody that is it actually merciful then for somebody who is born in a situation like that, knows no better, is blind, quote unquote, right? And just disappears. I understand it on a macro level, but on a micro level, does the same play out?
Wait, what do you mean the same play out? Like a micro level? That individual person, are they eventually saved, or do they? What do you mean? I'm not sure I understand the question.
Was that person predestined to be on the unlucky end of the mercy cycle?
How See, I would say no. I would always go back to like the only reason you don't get mercy is because you reject it. Because I would think, well,
Is that really
I mean,
true?
I don't know if that's true. Actually,
I
I
don't
mean, it's hard
know.
to say because you'd have to look at. I mean, people that like, especially in the ancient world, if you were putting your children through the fire, those children did not receive mercy. Yes, I don't know. But were they chosen? But then you got to ask, were they chosen by God or were they chosen by their parents to go through the fire? Because it clearly says that God says, this didn't even come to my mind. Like, what are you doing? You guys are. So, I don't know. So I wouldn't say they were predestined for that if God says, this didn't come to my mind. He would say, this is not what I had envisioned for you. This isn't your destiny. Things like that. But that's just, I mean, that's what my mind keeps going back to. And that's what I mean. I feel like I'm framing this whole topic
No, I think that's
differently.
super helpful. I think that's great.
Mitch, you got any thoughts? I feel like I just get down into rabbit trail or something.
I don't know. God's character seems really um, hard to always categorize, and I don't want to say like inconsistent, but inconsistent as far as I can tell. I don't always I'm just thinking of Revelation and the way we see him interacting with his creation in the Bible. It's not always clear why he behaves the way he does, such that you could tie it back to a certain characteristic of his. Sometimes it seems like you have to like cram it into like a doctrinal characteristic that we have of his.
Yeah.
But that's why when Jason and I quote somebody saying Job is a linchpin, and we both say it for different reasons. Who's it?
What? What is that?
Joe is the
Who
linchpin?
who says Job is a linchpin of the Bible?
Oh, I think Jess and Sherry did, actually.
Oh,
They said Job
well,
is linchpin. And
I
yeah.
I say it, and I don't say it for the same reason Jason does, or probably Jess and Cherry. But I say it because it's the one that tells me that, yeah, of course, his behavior uh, doesn't fall into your tidy categories of how you think he's supposed to behave. So that's why when there's an impression of when I get an impression about something in scripture, like if I get the impression that he seems to be predestining people for whatever, for any kind of thing, that why would you cause someone to do that? Why would you harden somebody's heart? Say, for instance, I just what can I say? I mean, you can't stay his hand or say, "What have you done?" It's just like you have to do the best you can with what you're receiving and say, this is how I understand reality to be based on the what he's revealed to us. And I don't have to, maybe that isn't right though. I was going to say I don't have to take all the time in the world to understand how it would fit with a certain quality that I apply to him and my understanding of that quality. So if I say God is loving, so God wouldn't do this because this isn't loving, then I've defined what loving is. I've
Yeah.
defined
Yeah.
how I think God behaves and how that can't square with my definition of what loving is. And that's the very hard thing not to do. But also, maybe you kind of have to do it. I don't know. My head's spinning. My Christian nihilism is raging.
I'm with you. This is a hard thing to get at. I don't know. And maybe, John, do you have any thoughts before I?
None. No.
Well, I guess I'll say this. Maybe we can direct back to the original, like the original idea of like why are we even talking about this? Like, what is
Sure. That's good.
in order
Well,
to, because that's like, yeah, how does this help? Yeah, what is all this for? Like, even talking about God hardening someone's heart, like why are we even wrestling with that? Like, what is
40
this
minutes ago,
ultimately?
Jason, when I asked you what your opinion was, that was actually what I was asking about. So,
On why we're wrestling with it?
yeah,
Oh.
yeah. I asked you what was your opinion. I didn't listen to your thing on Signal.
Like
That's
about
what I'm wanting to start with.
About predestination, or about the reason why we're struggling with it?
Or
The
any
reason,
of it.
I think it's kind of related to both, actually, because I mean, I think it works on such a micro level in my head. Like you were talking about macro and micro. It's just like when you create something. So if you want to take it down to the family level, you're having a child and you want to create. Like you're not going to put this child through the fire. You're having this child. You want life to be in the world. You want that life to flourish. And so in order for that life to flourish, you're going to trim away the branches. You're going to keep calling it to its fullest potential. So in a way, your father, your own personal father, is kind of like your judge. He's kind of like damning you because the son is growing into the image of the father, and he's never quite there. He's never reaching it. So the judge is always calling him higher, kind of condemning in a way because he's not. So the idea of destiny or predestination, I'm like, you create this life and you have this vision for it, of that it has this great destiny within it, this infinite destiny. And so it always has this infinite potential that it can never reach. Yeah. So I think it kind of, that's for me, I think gets it, in my mind, I think that gets at the heart of it, because I think that works fractally all the way down to the tiniest level. But at the same time, whatever that thing is that is calling life into being, at the same time it's creating and continually causing to grow, it's still redeeming everywhere it fails. So it won't. It's almost like, yeah, it's almost like it's judging the thing and pleading its case at the same time. It's saying this thing could be so much more, but I'm gonna, but it pleads your case at the same time and calls you into that. I don't know. That's the only way I know how to describe it. And I think the best word we have for it is something like love. But then, but I don't know that's. I was even thinking about that today. I'm like, whatever. I don't even know if that's the right word for it, because it just seems to be. I guess it depends on what you think what love is, but that to me, I think, gets at the heart of it, and that maybe is why we're even wrestling with the question, because when we look out at our reality, it appears that this is happening on a micro and macro level, and so we see a city, like a city could be called to its fullest potential, and so then you have members of the city that appear to just be falling off into damnation or something. You have to wonder, like, how is this happening? Did God choose them for that? But then if you keep zooming into the micro level, it's like, did God harden their hearts, or did they harden their hearts? Like, I mean, if I want to put an example out there, I could talk like, gosh, I feel like I'm straw manning when I'm bringing this example in. I feel like I'm straw manning the God, like having like God actually hardening somebody. Because I was about to bring in my Aunt Danny and say, like, she's been given I mean, maybe all right now, but I know like when she was on drugs and stuff, like there were so many times where people just kept offering a helping hand. Like, here's mercy, here's forgiveness, here's mercy, here's forgiveness. And she just kept diving back down into hell. And it was like her own choice. And you could say, but that's what I mean when I bring up that scenario. I feel like I'm just kind of straw manning the whole God hardening someone's heart and the whole idea with Pharaoh in the Bible, because that I don't want to straw man it. Like I almost want to steel man it. And like Mitch is saying, like sometimes God does things and you don't necessarily have to have a reason for what he did, because you don't want to put him in a box and make an idol out of him or something like that. See, here's what Sherry said. God is the sun of righteousness, as it is written, shining his rays of goodness simply on everyone. But the soul, by its natural capacity, becomes in character either wax when God loving. Huh. So you're welcome to hop on here, Sherry, if you want.
Yeah.
So is that kind of saying when God's sun, his righteousness is on you, you can either melt like wax or harden into like harder clay or something, I'm guessing?
So Jason, what you're saying is the macro and the we're having this discussion, and people have been having this discussion for thousands of years because they can see the potential and still judge at the same time. It's that dichotomy.
I feel like that is.
And that's why
I
it
mean,
bothers us, because you see something that could have been and isn't. And everywhere you look, you see things that could have been or should be, but aren't.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that's a right way to. I'm not sure. That's what I mean. We keep coming back to this discussion. Like, it's not. Yeah, it's not just us. This is like you said, Mitch. This is kind of like feels like a horse we've beat to death. You know, this topic. But that yeah, what's intriguing to me is what you brought up, John. Like, why is it? Why do we keep coming back to it? Because there's something here, like the fact that we're wrestling with it, and that's what I think when you're saying that, that's kind of what I'm getting at. Is I feel like I think that is kind of fundamentally why I think we keep maybe coming back to it, because it's like, are some predestined to be damned? Are some predestined to be saved? And I would say yes, and the judgment begins in you. Like you're both, because your God is, or love, or whatever, is judging you and pleading your case at the same time. So he's.
Is there any way to describe that to somebody who is looking and is curious about the Christian faith, but sees logistical fallacies? God is everywhere, God controls everything, God is good, but God sends people to hell. Like, is there a way that you can describe what you are to that person in that position?
What we might not be fully appreciating is how drastically wrong you can get a picture when you don't see it fully, and how our perspective is extremely small. God's perspective is the ultimate perspective, and it's all encompassing. And you can imagine a picture for yourself, or a passage from a book, how magnificently wrong you can misinterpret it uh, when you're not looking at the entire thing, or when you're looking at it extremely closely, or if you're looking at it extremely far out and you just don't have the sensory power to take it all in. This is something I think everyone can relate to. They whether or not you will admit that your perspective is that drastically different uh, in terms of capacity from God's is maybe something else.
So this says, all right, she continued on this. So let's see. I'll just go back to the first one. God is the Son of Righteousness, as is written, shining his rays of goodness simply on everyone. But the soul, by its natural capacity, becomes in character either wax when God loving, or clay when matter loving. Consequently, just as clay by nature is dried by the sun, yet wax is naturally softened, so also every matter loving and world loving soul, being admonished by God, yet molding itself in character after clay, is hardened, and it thrusts itself like Pharaoh toward destruction. But every God-loving soul is softened as wax, and letting in both the impressions and characteristics of divine traits, it becomes, by the Spirit, the dwelling place of God.
That
It's a
is really
tremendous
good.
image. You have
I really like
God
that.
hardening the heart like the sun, but it's just by being the sun. But just by simply
Right.
by virtue of being God, he's hardening the heart. But it has more to do with the substance of. But again, who created the substance? It's still very unnerving.
Oh, if you're saying if he made you a vessel of clay or a
If he
vessel of
made
wax.
two
Clay
as
or
clay and
wax.
one person as wax,
I think in the quote though, Sherry was kind of saying like, it sounds like Saint Maximus is almost saying something like you kind of make yourself the clay or the wax by what you love in this life. So I don't. Yeah, that's where it's hard because I mean, even in Timothy it says that like he made some vessels for honor and some for dishonor. But then he goes on to say, if you cleanse yourself from this and that, you'll make yourself a vessel for honor. So it's like, yeah. So this tension exists and it remains. It seems like, but he made us all of clay, I guess. So you kind of have to. Man is made from the dust of the earth. I don't know. I don't know where I want to go with that. That's why I kind of.
It's hard because, I mean, kind of like what you said earlier, Mitch, the question just continually arises. This quote is great. And Jason, I love what you said about we're all made from the clay, right? But then to me, it sounds like you're just describing those who are elected to become wax.
Well,
And we're back
here
at
was
the.
my thought. I'll try to expand on that a little bit more, and maybe this can kind of get at the Pharaoh thing a little bit too.
Yeah, please.
So, well, I mean, I don't know because the land of Egypt is different than the land of Canaan. But the land of Canaan is, and even
That's
the Garden of Eden. If everybody's this vessel of clay, God is giving a mist as well as giving the sun. And so the land of Canaan, God describes as it's the land of promise, and it receives the rain to wash you, to cleanse you, and also the rain would soften the clay. And or at least in hopes it would soften the clay. It should soften the clay. And if the clay becomes hard, even with the rain, because you can kind of see rain as something like mercy or like, I don't know how you want to see it exactly too. I kind of sometimes wonder if it could be seen as God's word coming down from heaven, like the Logos, because it falls from heaven and then grass and things and life comes forth. So you kind of have to wonder if you're living back then, what is in this rain that is giving life? Is it kind of like, to be crude, like sperm from above or something? But so you see it that way. But the thing with Pharaoh too is I was thinking like if he's living in this all the so in Canaan, land of promise, it rains from heaven. Then you get the life-giving substance. You get the grain and the fruit. You get to eat of the fruit of the land. You get to enjoy the pleasures of life. But in Pharaoh's land, it's like it talks about in the land of Egypt, it's watered by foot. It's like the slaves are bringing in the water, but he's still being watered, right? He's not necessarily. I don't know. He keeps hardening himself at the same time as God's hardening him. And so when I think of Moses going there, it's almost like taking the veil off or something. And now he's got to deal with the sun even more. And so in that way, he just keeps hardening himself at the same time that Moses, every time Moses goes to him, he's got to stare in the face of the sun or something like that. And he hardens even more. So it's kind
Right.
of
So
like
it's by his own character. He's in a downward
kind of like,
spiral.
yeah, it's kind of like both in a way, I think, because if
Yeah.
God were to, the more he reveals himself to you, what are you going to do with that? Are you going to, um, yeah, I guess like Chip said, kind of become the wax. But at the same time, like he doesn't have to reveal himself to you. So if he didn't reveal himself, you wouldn't necessarily be hardened, I guess, by
Right.
him. You
Right.
could maybe still harden yourself, but you wouldn't necessarily be hardened by him. I don't know. And
Hmm.
that feels wrong. That feels a little bit wrong to say. I don't know. I'm literally just feel like I'm just spewing out words here. I don't really know.
There's something I think is interesting about this debate continuing to resurface is sort of the suppositions that either side has about each other. Um, so, someone who advocates for the truth in predestination might think of those who don't as people who are unwilling to accept what God has revealed Himself to be, when in reality, what they're unwilling to say is that God could be what in their mind is just obviously evil. On the other side, someone who refuses predestination might think of those who accept it as those who, I don't know, think that they're better than others, think that they are hateful towards others, when really all they're left with is trusting the one that they trust, and thinking that they've understood him to say something clearly. Um, I just think it's interesting. Maybe those kind of, because both of those accusations, whether they're true or not, in a particular case, are true of people somewhere at some time. That's those are positions that happen in the human heart, like, um, and so we just don't want. Oh, Craig said something funny about our conversations with each other. He said, we're all on a mission to kind of find each other's bad ideas, kind of seek and destroy them. And I was like, yeah, we don't want this refusal to accept God as He's revealed Himself to exist in the world. We don't want this hatred and feeling better than others, and wanting to see others suffer to exist in the world. So we're looking for the bad idea, and some of it may or may not necessarily actually relate to the theological concept, which is abstracted to high heck at this point, of predestination.
Oh man, yeah. Okay, gosh, I kind of some thoughts were going through my head too, and I'm like, I can try to come at this another angle. I feel like I'm gonna mess it up again too with the whole Pharaoh thing. Um, I don't really know. Because I was thinking while you were talking too, and you mentioned Craig and us all kind of like we're even encountering each other on this micro level, and I was thinking before you even went into that about Jacob and Esau, and because he says in that I've seen your face like I've seen God's face, and he calls the name of the place Peniel, so he's wrestling with the angel of God, but he's also wrestling with his brother, um, and so if I apply that to Pharaoh and Moses, it's kind of like Moses is going back and um, and it's Peniel again. So Pharaoh is having to deal with Peniel. He's having to deal with I've seen your face like I've seen God's face. Um, and so what's he going to do at that point when the I guess like you would say the sun is shining on him? Gosh, I'm doing a terrible job at describing this. I guess because I was thinking on a macro level, like even so in my personal life, if I cut off a family member or something, and I move away, I could be fine. And I'm like, okay, I'm just living life now. I maybe hardened my heart a little bit, but now I've forgotten about it. It's no big deal. Like, it's in the past. I'm just living life. I'm not bitter. I'm not resentful. I'm just away from it all. I've gotten away.
Hmm.
And then that family member comes back. It's like, and if God told them to come back to me and try to reconcile, and God says, hey, you need to go reconcile, and then I get mad, I have a choice to either harden myself against that person when they come back to me, or I can choose to try to accept them back in my life and forgive them. Then I kind of have to ask, if God is actually told them to come back and reconcile with me, and I choose, it's like this simultaneous, and I choose to harden my heart. It's like, well, did God harden my heart just by telling them to come back? Because he could have just left me alone. I was fine. I didn't need them in my life anymore. But all children, like all children are God's children. So he kind of has to. And so I guess where I was kind of going with that is in the situation with Egypt too. It's like you have Moses and Pharaoh, which they are brothers, because Moses is it's almost like he's a half and half. He grows up. He's raised by Pharaoh's daughter, so it's like he's kind of a Hebrew, but he's kind of an Egyptian as well. And so he's a mediator between both. And he goes, and this mediating force goes. You have the older brother, Pharaoh is oppressing, or Egypt is oppressing Israel, younger brother Israel, and Moses is in between, and he's trying to reconcile the brothers and turn their faces back to one another. And the Egypt is the one that hardens. But it's like, what I don't know, what's the father to do in that scenario when you have these two children and one is locking the other one, enslaving the other one, and you have the other one's crying out to you, and he's like, no, I'm gonna fix this. And so you could argue, I think, that God is hardening Pharaoh's heart, because Pharaoh could just be like, why'd you start any of this? Like, you could have just left this alone, type thing. But I don't know. I have no idea if that even made sense. Like I said, I feel like I talk about this in a really roundabout way sometimes.
No, that was really good, Jason. Really good example.
I think it makes a lot of sense, but I think the only reason we would ever say God hardened Pharaoh's heart is not because we're examining the context and coming to that conclusion. It's just because it said it, and so then we have to figure out what to do with it. So it was like an explicit statement, if I remember correctly, and
Yeah.
and it comes back around, I think, in the New Testament. It's like referenced again.
Here, I have a question. So he makes a statement, and let's say this could be, I don't know, maybe this. Sorry, if you guys don't want to do this, this is just what popped in my head. So I kind of want to go down the statement. So God makes a statement: for this purpose, for this very reason, I have raised you up, that I may show my power in you, and my name might be declared in all the earth. And then he goes on, and he's saying that about Pharaoh, right?
Mm-hmm.
And who like ends up getting all these plagues and all this stuff. But so he raises up a king to a throne. And so, like, and to me, in my head, that throne is always the mercy seat, because that's the throne that or that should be the mercy seat, because that's the throne that God sits on. So if he's trying to call man into his own likeness, he's trying to raise up a king. Any king he puts in position should be sitting on a throne of like truth and mercy, or something like we talk about. And so it just made me think when he says that I may show my power in you. Jesus specifically mentions at least one of the powers of God. There's probably more than one, but he mentions the power of forgiveness. And Moses, I'm pretty sure, mentions the same one in the book of Numbers. Well, he quotes God's name. It's Numbers like 14, 17, because God says his name in Exodus, and then Moses quotes it back to God. And he says, let me read it really quick. He says, and now I pray, let the power of my Lord be great, just as you have spoken, saying, the Lord is long-suffering and abundant in mercy, forgiving iniquity and transgression. But he by no means clears the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation. Pardon the iniquity of this people. So if you just replace Pharaoh with that, because Pharaoh at that moment, I guess, is Israel's Lord, like he's their master. Like whether he's a slave master or not, he's their Lord. So God is saying, this is how you should be seated. Pharaoh, I've raised you up for this purpose, that you should be long-suffering, abundant in mercy, forgiving iniquity and transgression, by no means clearing the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers to the third and fourth generation. If he's going to be in God's likeness, I guess. That's so. What do I do with that? Like, I mean, is that good to pull those, to tie those together, those scriptures together, or would it be better to just leave it? Because it seems like normally when people mention the Pharaoh being hard his heart in that verse, it's really sobering. God saying, it almost sounds like God saying, I created you just to beat you, type thing.
Yeah.
But I feel like it makes more sense to me of God saying, I raised you up for this purpose, to be like me. And because you are rejecting that, when I reveal myself, it's gonna you're gonna suffer. But I don't know.
It reminds me of the guy that was blind in the Gospels, and
Bartimaeus?
when they asked, well, whoever it was said,
Yeah, I'm joking.
they said,
I feel like it's a song.
why was he born blind? Was it his parents'
Yeah.
sin or his sin?
Yeah.
And he said, what? Neither. This was so. What did they say then?
The glory of God would be revealed, or something like that.
Yeah, something
Yeah,
like that.
something like that.
Let's see. John 9, who sinned? And his disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world.
There's another kind of thing that's like that, but it's like on the other end of the spectrum. It's more like that one feels kind of like, wow, like there's sort of a redemption for my suffering. But there's another version. There's another kind of verse that's similar to this, but it doesn't strike that same note. And I want to say it was about Esau, and I want to say it was in Romans, and it references like before he was born and he did anything.
Let's see.
Do you know what I'm talking about, Jason?
Yeah, the really scary verses that I always wonder if I'm just like, if I'm looking at them wrong.
Him,
where
because it references his birth, and it was like basically it's saying the same thing. It's like it has nothing to do with his sin. Like this is just all part of the plan. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Pursue peace with all people and holiness, without which no one will see the Lord, looking carefully lest anyone fall short of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up cause trouble, and by this many be defiled, lest there be any fornicator or profane person like Esau, who for one morsel of food sold his birthright. For you know that afterward, when he wanted to inherit the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no place for repentance, though he sought it diligently with tears. Was that the part you were thinking of?
No, that's Hebrews, isn't it?
Yeah.
I was thinking Romans. Okay, here it is. 10,
Oh,
9,
Romans
10.
9. Yeah.
Not only that, but Rebekah's children were conceived at the same time by our father Isaac. Yet before the twins were born or had done anything good or bad, in order that God's purpose and election might stand, not by works, but by him who calls, she was told, the older will serve the younger. Just as it is written, Jacob I've loved, Esau I've hated. What then shall we say? Is God unjust? Not at all. For he says to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. But it's like the blind man story, because it doesn't say, look at it, nothing to do with his sin. This was in play before he was even born. Except it doesn't strike quite the same note. I wonder why. I mean, I wonder why. Because even the blind man had to suffer, and it wasn't because of anything he did wrong. So why should he have to suffer? Esau has to suffer, but it wasn't because of anything he did wrong. He hadn't done anything good or bad. It's very, very strange.
You mean,
And
oh,
that's
because
that's
this was
kind of what I was
pronounced.
asking you earlier, Jason, with the micro versus macro. Is it's easy to understand here in the context of of the macro scriptures that the cycle of mercy is perpetuated. But yeah, it seems like he was dealt just a crappy hand, kind of in a way.
Just because, but would you say that you? So I guess you would say the same about Cain and Abel, right? The older
Probably.
shall serve the older shall serve the younger.
I guess this is why I kind of have a more particular view of God's sovereignty. It just seems like it's all part of some kind of plan. And human will is definitely in the story.
But how would
But
you? Can I ask you guys a question? How would you frame it? Being a father and you had two sons, would you say that same statement over them? The older shall serve the younger, or would you say the younger shall serve the older?
oh, I wouldn't say either of those things to my kid.
I was thinking, I don't know.
I would
All right,
think.
here's how it's gonna be. You would have the older serve the this younger serve the older, right? Because the older is more
No, I would
mature.
have the older serve the younger
Why?
because he's
Because he needs to be a good
because
servant
he's been
king,
given
like
more.
Christ.
No, because he's more accountable. Because he's been given more time. If nothing else, he's been given more time in life. So I would think I'd like you. You should be setting the best example for your younger brother or something like that. I think that's to me. I think that's how I would phrase it. And especially if the older is supposed to inherit the blessing and the birthright, I would want him to use that to serve the younger or something like that. Because I think that's the pattern you want to keep going through creation. Because if you have it the other way around, I would think then the younger never receives, or I guess technically isn't supposed to receive the birthright or the blessing, and then he's always having to just give up, and give up to the older. Because in this way, like Adam is the first, right? And then Jesus is the second, and the older shall serve. Wait a
I'm trying
second.
to wonder what you're getting at.
I guess I'm just saying it's a to me, it has to apply fractally or something, I guess, because it's this weird voice from heaven saying the older shall serve the younger. So I'm like, all right, then it's a pattern, and it has to this
Well,
is
which of these
somehow
things which of your
a
sons would you
mechanism.
say this to? I love you, I hate you.
Jacob, I love that you saw it.
Which of your two sons would you say that to?
Or even more so, telling
Because
your
then it gets
wife
pretty
that I'm going to
fractally
love the
weird.
first and hate the second, before you even know them,
It gets
before
pretty
they're even
fractally
born.
weird at that point.
The last shall be first, and the
Fractally
first shall
weird.
be last. Right? Huh.
So, Mitch, I agree with the statement that this section here is extremely problematic for me personally. And I agree that this brings into the question of God's sovereignty and what that looks like. And I really liked what you had said earlier about how our definitions of God and the characteristics that we use to describe God are always fluid. And I think this is one of those, that sovereignty is one of those definitions that has both changed, and the way that I see that God is sovereign has changed at the same time. So I just throwing it out there. This one is problematic for me as well. This is hard for me to overlook. It seems pretty explicit.
Well, in what way is it problematic?
Huh. That's interesting.
It's problematic for me, and I might be reducing this down to a level that I don't know, that doesn't mean anything. But it's problematic to me because, I mean, it's not really problematic, but this is what it's very obvious here that there is a narrative that needed to be played out through the sons. And I don't know if Jacob and Esau were particularly special or if this would have been played out somewhere else had it not been them. But it's problematic to me because even before, I don't know, it's a hard thing to swallow that before they were chosen, the narrative was. And I don't know how I fit into that.
Well, this thing is, you get these slivers and you think, well, I don't know if we're supposed to do anything with it. Well, we're supposed to do something. Like you always
Right.
get this push, like when Hebrews, kind of where Jason was at, just like, don't be like Esau. And here too, don't be like Esau. Don't sell your birthright
Hmm.
for a single meal. So you still get this concept of like, you choose, like you don't do it. And the caution is in Romans, I think, with like, how can he hold it against me if if I don't have a say in a matter?
Hmm.
And it's like, don't be Esau.
Hmm.
It's like, it is done. Now go do. Uh,
Hmm.
so
That's a really interesting point too. How can he
That
can't
is
really
really
hold
good.
it against you if you don't have a say in the matter. But that's a
but I think
proverb
he
too,
he
right?
brings that
I think
up.
that's in Proverbs.
Is it?
Yeah, it says like you say surely you say we didn't know this, surely we didn't know this, and then it says like does not he who weighs the hearts consider it? Something like that.
I
Let's
was
see.
getting it mixed
Deliver
up.
if you say, surely we did not know this. Does not he who weigh the hearts consider it? He who keeps your soul, does he not know it? And will he not render to each man according to his deeds? I don't know. Sherry brought up an interesting point. She said, in transformation, doesn't the older serve the younger? And then she said, it sounds like
Um,
memory. And
Hmm.
that seemed to be, and that seems to be what I kind of even, when I said Adam serves, Adam's the older and Christ is the younger. It's kind of like a caterpillar and a butterfly thing. First is the man of what does it say in Corinthians? It says the first man, Adam, was a man of clay, life-giving or a living being, but the second Adam is a life-giving spirit, something like that. However, the spiritual is not first, but the natural, and afterward the spiritual. The first man was of earth, made of dust. The second man was the Lord from heaven. As was the man of dust, so also are those who are made of dust. And as is the heavenly man, so also are those who are heavenly. And we have borne the image of the man of dust. We shall also bear the image of the heavenly man. Like that makes sense to me. That's what I mean. It makes sense to me. Like when I follow the pattern fractally even to that level, but then when I come back around to Jacob and Esau, you're just still kind of wrestle with it. You're just kind of like and because you could even say, well, Jacob serves Israel, right? Like Jacob's the older, then God renames him Israel, and that kind of seems like transformation there. But yeah, the Jacob and Esau, when he's talking about them specifically, he says, two nations are in your womb, and the older shall serve the younger. Yeah.
Here's what I was thinking about. But if our unrighteousness brings out God's righteousness more clearly, what shall we say that God's using human argument? Certainly not. If that were so, how could God judge the world? Someone might argue, if my falsehood enhances God's truthfulness and so increases his glory, why am I still condemned as a sinner? Why not say, as some slanderously claim, that we say, let us do evil that good may result? Their condemnation is just.
She asks, but aren't Jacob, Sherry, you should hop on here if you want to. But aren't Jacob and Esau reconciled? That's it. I think ultimately they are. Like in the story.
I'm not so sure, but we've talked about this before, Jason. You have a lot of great thoughts on that story.
Them wrestling together or something?
On their reconciliation too, I've seen the face of God, and I something sits weird with me in that story, and it's kind of what happens after they have that meeting together. Esau kind of returns to the wilder lands.
The wilder lands.
The wilder lands. Wilder lands. Which I don't think, maybe it doesn't mean anything, but it, you've really got me thinking about this story, Jason. And I never did my due diligence in getting to the bottom of what I felt about it. But he went back into Canaan, and I think he married foreign wives, and there's some sense, I feel like, and this comes back up in the prophets, kind of like where Edom is always sort of rebuilding and being destroyed again.
Who did he marry?
The
giants?
Some people have said that. I don't know. It's not obvious.
Yeah, the Hittite. He married 2 Hittites.
Oh, really?
He was 4 years old when he took his wife Judith, the daughter of Beri the Hittite, and Basemot, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, and they were a grief of mine to Isaac and Rebekah. He later married what's her face? I think a wife of Ishmael, I think.
Oh, really?
So I think he married an Egyptian as well. Yeah, but that's interesting. I mean, you bring that up because it says over and over and over in Genesis, it says Esau is Edom. Esau is Edom. So it wants to make it clear that on this micro level, individual level, it also kind of almost applies on a macro level, like two nations are in your room, right? And then they have them being reconciled on a micro level. But then on a macro level, you watch the story unfold, and it's like they still kind of are at odds, or there's this tension. But it's when they're wandering through the wilderness and things like that.
Mm-hmm. And the reconciliation is, I like that turn of phrase that Jesus is for the sake of the elect. Because even in Malachi, where it says, Edom says to the Lord, if you tear us down, we'll just rebuild. And he says, you're going to rebuild, but I'll demolish it again. So you get the sense that on a macro scale, every time that, in the story, it rings true. That every time that the reconciliation happens, it's for the sake of the elect. In this case, it's to Jacob's benefit. That
that's really interesting.
Brother is not out to destroy him.
So in Malachi,
so I don't know.
It
looks like
Edom says
at first blush.
But you're saying in Malachi it says that they were torn down, and Edom says we're going to rebuild. Well, the reason I ask is because Israel says the same thing in Isaiah, right?
Oh, really? That's kind of cool.
I think like Isaiah 9 or something.
Well, that rings true on the micro too, because Jacob is someone. Look at it this way: if Edom says we'll rebuild, and God says I'll just destroy what you rebuild, Jacob destroys what what God builds, and God rebuilds it again for him. He's the elect. His justice, the justice he deserves, is constantly redirected back on God, and God suffers again and
Wait,
again for the sake of Israel.
Yeah.
wait, can you explain that more? Like, so Israel tears down what God builds, and God rebuilds it for him.
Yeah, so he gives Israel a promised land. They destroy it, and he rebuilds
Oh,
it
I see.
back for them. They destroy it again, he rebuilds it back for them. Conversely, Edom
Wait,
is constantly trying to rebuild, but is getting wiped out again.
Yeah.
no, but it's the same story, right? How is it? I'm sorry, I'm struggling to see it because God gives Edom to Esau. He gives him the land. They go in, they conquer the giants. They do the same thing Israel does, and then God tells Israel, "I've given this land to Edom. They have. They went in, they conquered whatever. They built up their kingdom. Israel goes in and they do the same thing, and then they build up, and then I thought it was like the same story as Edom, because I thought God tears down. Because doesn't he say, "I'm going to make Israel a heap of ruins," and like, isn't that what Lamentations and all that is about?
Yeah,
Or
the
God
difference
demolishes
is,
what they
I
built?
think, the ultimate outcome for Israel is always restoration, and the ultimate outcome for Edom is always um, destruction.
Oh, that's bleak, man.
Yeah,
Is that not true
I don't.
though? That
I don't
really
think that's
is.
true. I disagree with that completely. But I think that's just gets into a
Why? Because
well,
I'm
because
tracking with Mitch. I understand.
because even Sodom and Gomorrah are going to be justified, right? So I don't see how Edom gets left out. But I guess maybe. I mean, maybe there's scriptures to say that I'm wrong. Um, I mean, it's one of those things where like Sodom is what, like Sodom is eternally burning, something like that. But then at the same time, it says, "Well, you're justified because of the deeds of Israel." Um,
Hmm.
and they're your sister. So if I just don't, I guess in my mind, I'm like, I don't know how that. I don't know. Maybe there is a sense to where Mitch is right in that Edom as a kingdom. If you're saying you build your kingdom according to this archetypal structure, it's going to
Sure.
fall. Because Edom is described almost like a predator that lives in the mountains, in the height of the mountains, like a predatory hawk or something like that. And so if this is how you're structuring your kingdom, you're
Hmm.
you're going to build a nation, and these are the principles, the principalities or whatever that are forming your kingdom. Is you're going to be like, we're going to be like predators dwelling in the mountains, like, and we'll swoop down on the prey. Then I am going to continually, perpetually, eternally tear that kingdom down. So you could say that, but then that doesn't. I don't know. That's really interesting to me because that it's like Edom reached this kind of archetypal um, kingdom. Huh. Because I mean, I would say the same thing about Egypt in a way. Like if I built a kingdom that is titled the House of Bondage, like
Hmm.
God's going to come in and rip that apart. And if you
Sure.
continually are like, this is how I'm going to my kingdom after this model, then it's like God, the judgment's pronounced on that kingdom. Um, it's a closed womb, and it's like going to happen that, and God's going to rip it apart, and they're going to go through the Red Sea. So I think is that kind of what you're saying, Mitch, in a way? Like it seems like that is the narrative pronounced over them or something like that. I don't know.
yes.
Yes.
Well, you're saying it scales in that way from Romans to the land that they control.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So what do you say about uh, Ammon and Moab? What would you have to say about them? I'm curious now that we've gotten this realm of like different, I guess you could say, spiritual kingdoms or something like that.
Oh, I don't know this. I don't know this too.
The two sons of Lot, I think the ancestral ones. Well, I guess the reason I ask is because there's when Israel is going through the wilderness, he passes by. I think those are the three kingdoms. God says, "Don't touch them. I've given them this land."
Mm.
And they all seem to respond to Israel differently. Who I guess you could say is like their younger brother, their younger cousin, or something like that. And who's the one with Balaam? Is that Moab? Is that the Moabites? I can't even remember. I don't.
You know better than I do, brother.
Yeah, I don't know.
Let's see. Balak. Camped in the plains of Moab. Now Balak, the son of Zippor, saw that all Israel had done to the Amorites in Moab was exceedingly afraid. So Moab was the one that got. Moab is one of the sons of Lot. He got Israel to commit harlotry and fornication, I guess, with the Baal of Peor, that whole incident, while they were in the wilderness. I don't know, sorry, I probably sound like I'm scattered or off somewhere. I'm just trying to look at like the spiritual structure of this
You're more
kingdom.
familiar with these. You're more familiar with these than I am. Like, I don't think I could comment on it.
Well, I guess if I'm just looking at if I'm trying to figure out what is the characteristics, like are there defining characteristics of these kingdoms that would cause a god, I guess you could say. I mean, I don't know what other way to phrase it. A god or whatever this thing is we were talking about at the beginning of this conversation, this creative redeeming force, this divine love. If there is this kingdom that is built on certain characteristics and principles of how they're going to live and exist, then this creative force is going to determine a judgment upon them, because and so I guess I'm kind of maybe approaching it that way, like looking at like are we given certain characteristics to where it has hit this spiritual state, like spiritual kingdom or archetypal figure or something like that. I'm trying to think of more common ones that we might use nowadays.
Yeah.
Like to give more
Are you
examples.
asking the characteristics about the kingdom of Israel?
Say like there's probably an eternal judgment pronounced over Nazi Germany. Like, right? Like not necessarily saying like that specific nation now and those people, but if I were living in the US and I became president and I said, now we're going to establish the US as the model of Nazi Germany, it's like I would probably experience some sort of judgment. I would hope I would. So I guess like that nation, Nazi Germany, kind of maybe hit this archetypal. I don't know what else. The archetypal might not be the right word, but like like a model in the heavens or something, and it's like almost like a blueprint or a pattern, and where it's like this is not how you're doing this. So same thing with Edom in a way, or something like that. It's kind of like maybe they reached this point of Andrew's here.
Hello,
hey man,
hello. How's it been?
This is good. How have you been?
Good.
This is Mitch and John.
Oh, hello.
Hey, Andrew.
Hey there, Andrew.
Nice to meet you.
We've never talked.
Yeah, nice meeting y'all.
Yeah, you too. So, Jason, just to make sure I understand what you're asking. Earlier, you had said that if you had established the kingdom of Egypt and had oriented it around bondage and oppression and slavery, you would expect to be judged for that, right?
I'd expect to be ripped open or something like that.
Right. Do you think that that would be solely because of your own doing? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would think so, because it's like Egypt is kind of like a vice that keeps clamping down, right? It's the house of bondage, and it keeps clamping down, and then God just keeps saying, "Let go, go,
Right.
let go." And then, so maybe if God never would have said "let go," you could say that,
Yeah,
like, you
that's
could
where I was
maybe make,
going.
yeah, because because you could say God hardened his heart just by saying "let go," and he's like, "No, I'm not letting go," and it's like,
Right.
and if God would have never spoken those words, I mean, I don't know. I guess you just still have one brother clamping down on the other, or something, enslaving the other.
But so now you're kind of talking about the reverse. Is there any way that you could establish a kingdom based on archetypal principles that has the opposite effect?
Have you read
What?
Saint Augustine's City of God?
I have
No.
not.
Say more.
He does. So Saint Augustine writes City of God when the Goths are just rolling through Rome, and everyone's wondering why, like, God is judging them that way. So he, a lot of the pagan critics at the time say that it's because of the adoption of Christianity that, like,
Yeah.
Rome has abandoned all of its ancestral gods, especially like the Vestal Virgins and whatnot, and because of that, like, we're getting the wrath of the gods. So Saint Augustine does a lot to say that no, Christianity's been a great boon to the empire.
Mm.
And the way he goes about that, even when saying that, when recognizing that the Roman Empire is currently, like, disintegrating, is one point he makes is that, like, religion is a magic. How do I explain this? When God's will isn't tied to rituals, it's not like there's some pagan ideas that, like, when you do a ritual, the God is, like, obliged to do your will. Saint Augustine clearly distinguishes Christianity from that. He says that God is not obliged to human whims. He says that if Christianity was the worship of the Roman gods, it wouldn't be Christianity, right? So part of Christianity is this self-giving, this, even of the Roman Empire, this self-giving of the whole thing. And he actually makes the case that the Goths, the pagans, will adopt Christianity, and because of that, parts of Rome, which you clearly see in the Holy Roman Empire. So, I mean, yeah, well done, Saint Augustine. But if you're talking about, like, establishing yourself on archetypal truths, Saint Augustine, I think, makes the case that sometimes those archetypal truths demand that your city falls.
Yeah, it's kind of weird.
And
So wait.
sometimes
Go ahead,
Jason.
Mitch. No, go ahead.
After you, I insist.
No. You go. I'll hold my thought. You go.
I don't know what I was going to say, except not only does sometimes the archetype demand that, you know, your city be ruined, but sometimes the pattern doubts. Sometimes the archetype just doesn't go according to type. There's Proverbs full of archetypes, and there's Ecclesiastes, the disruption of all archetypes. And so it's still worthwhile to have Proverbs, but you got to realize that Ecclesiastes is right behind it.
Never connected that before.
So John, were you kind of asking as well, like, if Pharaoh has established his kingdom on these archetypes and God never says, "Let my people go," would would they still be existing like that? Is that what you're kind of asking? Would they have never fallen if he would have never?
That's kind of the conclusion I had come to. I was
Like
thinking that. I wasn't really asking you that, but that's the conclusion I had kind of come to.
the weird thing. So what's kind of going through my head is the weird thing is like if God doesn't say it, the people are saying it. In a way, like they're crying out in bondage, like let us go. So God's almost like mirroring them or something. Well, I guess here's a weird thing.
The other way around.
Or God, or they're mirroring God. Yeah. So like so what this kind of gets into maybe our chat a little bit too about around time and space. Like those are the things we're kind of beholden to right now. We're almost in bondage to time and space in a way, and we kind of are crying out for infinity. So does that even scale up at that point where we're saying, let us go? This life we're in is this life of suffering. Let us go. And God is saying to what, Kronos, the god Kronos or something, let my people go. I don't know how, I'm just personifying him. It wouldn't really be Kronos, but
right.
Does that even scale up on that way where there's going to be this further liberation into I don't know what you call it, because I guess the reason I associate that is because in Galatians I think he talks about that specifically. He says that we're now in he talks about slavery, and he says so Egypt is kind of the kingdom of slavery, and then he says child doesn't differ much from a slave. I think it's Galatians. And then he says, now I say that the heir, as long as he is a child, doesn't differ from a slave, though he is master of all, but is under guardians and stewards until the time appointed by the Father. Even so, when we were children, were in bondage under the elements of the world. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, that we might receive the adoption of sons. So then it says, but then indeed, when you did not know God, you served those by nature who are not gods. But now after you have known God, or are rather known by God, how is it that you turn again to the weak and beggarly elements to which you desire again to be in bondage? So there's like this liberation from almost like that sounds like Gnosticism though, because it's not a liberation from the material world in a way, but it is in a way that like there's this co-working with it or something.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure what to do with it.
Yeah, I think it scales up.
I don't know. It's interesting stuff though.
Yeah, it's like it's kind of like being a saint, you know? Like we have all sorts of different saints. Like there's completely compassionate saints, and then there's, you know, Saint Nick punching Arius.
I haven't heard this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't either.
What did he do?
So
say more.
Sure. So you guys know, like the first ecumenical council, Council of Nicaea. It's where the faith gets hammered out. How do I explain this? So Arianism is on the rise. Everyone's debating like who is Christ? How do we understand him? What, you know, what's his nature or natures or whatever. So Arius says that you know, Christ isn't God. He's this created being. You could say like first among the angels, something like that. The main line of Arianism is there was a time when the Son was not, right? That there's God the Father, and then like he creates God the Son. And the Athanasian or the Nicene, you could say, the mainline, whatever form of Christianity, was that no, you know, God the Son is begotten, not created. He's, how do I explain this? Of one essence of the Father, you know, da 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 da. The stuff that becomes instantiated in Nicaea. And so the story goes that Arius and Athanasius were going at it once again, arguing over the nature of Christ. And St. Nicholas, like, upon hearing some heretical statement by Arius, goes up and he punches him right in the middle of the council. So St. Nick, obviously, he gets thrown in jail. Like, he can't punch people. He can't punch people at a council. And the reconciliation of St. Nick is that, like, some people have a dream of the Mother of God saying, like, no, St. Nick was just, like, being very vigorous in the defense of my son. You should really let him out of jail. So yeah, he gets reintegrated to the church.
It's every church history professor's favorite day of class when they can tell their students
sounds like it.
about the time Santa Claus punched.
Yeah.
It reminded me of Nehemiah when he rips out those people's hair. He gets mad at them. So I contended with them and cursed them, struck some of them and pulled out their hair and made them swear by God, saying, "You shall not give your daughters as wives to their sons, nor take their daughters for your sons as for yourselves." I always like that part. I can imagine ripping people's hair out. Luke says he's trolling. Him and Sherry have both been trolling over here.
I know.
And one of them should hop on. Get on here.
Troll us in person.
Help us figure this stuff out. And this is the selling of your birthright.
You know,
I'm not sure when that was.
What's interesting about the birthright selling, as it relates to that old dead horse we spent the first half of the conversation beating, I think it's interesting that you get Esau kind of making a deal with Jacob about the birthright, right? With the exchange for the bowl of soup. And then,
I love that.
but how the birthright actually ends up in Jacob's hands through the blessing, like, is completely. Esau doesn't actually have any say in it. Like, obviously, that exchange with the bowl of soup didn't change his birthright. That was not a real transaction.
Yeah.
That is interesting.
But it still ended up coming to pass in the same way. It's kind of the father's will and the will of his children, where, like, I don't know how to express it except that it was ultimately out of their hands anyway, but on the small scale, they acted out the parts to where he did willfully give up his birthright, but unwillfully.
You freeze?
I think so.
Mitch froze.
Oh no.
He was making a good point.
Oh man.
Wait, he moved. Are you back? You froze.
Still gone?
You're glitchy.
I can hear you.
I can hear you.
Yeah, it's interesting how like
Hello?
the two parents are set up against each other, right? Like Rachel wants Jacob to inherit the birthright, and then who is it? Who's the father? I forget.
Wait, is it
Isaac?
It's Isaac.
Isaac.
Thanks, Mitch.
Isaac?
Really?
Isaac
Yeah,
Jacob, yes.
Okay, yeah. He wants Esau to have the blessing. And when it comes time to trick him for the actual birthright, it's like the mother and Jacob get in cahoots, and that's the only reason why. That's how they're able to trick Isaac. It's like it plays out, that contention plays out both in the parents and the sons, but when Jacob and Rachel, whatever, get in cahoots, that's when they're finally able to trick Isaac.
Yeah,
Do you
that's
think
what's
there's
remarkable.
any?
It's the children have
Oh, sorry, Mitch. Please.
Go ahead, John.
Oh, I was going to say, do you think that there is?
I just want to say that
I think something's really laggy. Mitch, you go. I'm going to be quiet for a good 30 seconds.
Well, now he's frozen again. You go, John.
Man.
I guess it's your turn.
I was going to ask him his opinion on something, but now he's gone.
Well, what is it?
I was.
What is it?
He brought up the point that Jacob and Esau seemingly initiated the macro narrative at the beginning, even though it seemingly had no effect.
Yeah, that's true.
And I was going to wonder where else he saw that happening.
But I mean, at the same time, it's like you know, there has to be a firstborn. Like it's the necessity.
Is it the
of,
first part?
No, it's the necessity of like childbearing for there to be a firstborn. So, you know.
Yes.
It's like an agent arena relationship, but in this case, the parents are the arena.
All right, Luke is going to fill in for Mitch here. Thanks, Luke.
Oh, I'll text what Mitch would say. Okay,
yeah.
Luke, hop in here, man.
And this,
Don't be scared.
I don't know. I'm just kind of wondering. I'm a little stuck on what we read in Romans still a little bit earlier.
They tied together.
Is the act that Jacob and Esau did with the exchange of the soup the initiation for the global narrative, or was the narrative in place already and the exchanging of the soup was the initiation of what was already going to be? I don't know.
I mean, it starts with the birth, right? You know, Jacob grabbing Esau's heel.
Yeah.
But the point I was making was that like Rachel can't like birth two kids at once, right? There's definitely a firstborn. So the whole question of whether it was like the kids or the parents that did it first is like that whole story of the childbirth.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Well, she's here. Sherry knows all the right answers, Luke says. Give them to us.
No,
I don't know.
No, I don't know all the right answers. I'm trying to sew arms on a stuffed rabbit, and I couldn't tell. So I thought, well, I'll just hop in, and when I have a thought, I'll say it. I'm really enjoying listening to you guys wrestle with this. This is great. I'm just listening.
Thanks.
Sure, I really appreciate everything that you've shared too.
You know, one of us comes up with an idea and the other people, like Jacob, just grab onto their heels. No, my idea is better.
Oh, you know what I wanted to say when I was hopping in, and I had a thought actually. Now I just remembered it. There's a really interesting concept. This might really throw you guys for a new loop, but I think it'd be fun to explore. It's so when Joseph has the dream that all the sheaves of wheat are bowing down to him, remember? He has that dream? Well, he tells the dream to his brothers, and when he tells the dream, he makes the dream come true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's in the telling of the dream right? So, like, had he not told the dream, would the dream have come true? Probably not. But because he tells the dream, the whole thing starts to happen, right? Anyway, I was thinking about that in connection to Jacob and Esau and Isaac, right? I don't know how related. I don't know how related it is. It's just a random thought, so I'll be quiet now.
No, I think it's really fascinating because it's from when you were saying that, it actually reminded me almost more of when we were talking about Pharaoh in Egypt and God saying, "Let my people go," and so God speaks to Joseph, and he speaks to him in a dream, and then after that, Joseph suffers basically. So you could say, well, did God make him suffer or did Joseph make him suffer? Because he's just repeating what God said. And if he wouldn't have said anything, he probably never would have suffered. Yeah, but it's like, I don't know. Yeah, it's almost in like revealing God or revealing what God says. It puts things in motion, but then I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Well,
how does this?
I think it clearly demonstrates that it's not that we're not caught up in a linear narrative, right? That it's a lot more. It's a lot more complex than just a straight up this happened and then that happened and kind of thing. There you go. If a tree falls in the forest, is anybody here? Yeah, exactly.
The trees will hear. The trees will hear and they'll get him. They'll throw Joseph in the pit. Like, heck, we'll bow down to you. Yeah, I don't know. The Jacob and Esau thing is really interesting to me as well because the stew is red, and that's how he gets his name, right? I think that's what it says. There's some sort of like pun going on there as well. But then the other thing too is I'm not sure where this weird pattern comes into play of just like, well, Esau is a hunter, but the Jacob is actually like he's a goat herd or something, or a shepherd, you could say. Yeah, and same thing with Abel. Like, well, Cain is a tiller of the ground, so he's not necessarily a hunter. But
and hunters are always considered anathema in the Hebrew scriptures, right? So like the hunter is like plays the role of the bad guy in a sense. And I've always thought that so that I have to say before we go any further here that Jacob, like the Jacob that you're using his channel.
Yeah.
That Jacob, he actually did a whole video on Jacob have I loved and Esau have I hated.
Yeah.
Which I highly recommend. I can't remember how it went now, but it's really good. I just remember that. And then the idea of the hunter is someone who aims, who hyper focuses in on something, and I personally think that has something to do with him being problematic because he doesn't have a hunter doesn't necessarily have like a what do you call that, like a more a broad overall view of things, whereas a shepherd does. I mean, anyway, it's just my just a thought that I've had about that hunter.
No, I think I see what you're saying. Like a shepherd would almost have the same eyes as like a goat's eyes, or their pupils are flat because they see the horizon. They have like a more broad perspective or something like that.
Yeah, the hunter is just a targeter, right? A focuser, a targeter.
Yeah.
I get the same idea from Orion. I think Orion is an interesting little paradox in the sky because Orion is the perfect image of a man in that he is a hunter, right? He's a focuser, a targeter. Jordan Peterson talks about this a lot. that we have our eyes in the front of our head, so we don't have really great peripheral vision, right? All that stuff. And yet Orion hovers over us in such a way that if he just quit targeting, he would actually get to see the whole picture. But he circles the earth with his bow, right? Hyper focusing in on the thing he's aiming at. But that's not always a bad thing. We need to aim, right? And we need to focus on things too. So anyway, totally took you guys off track. Sorry.
No. We're bouncing around.
The video you mentioned, I think one point that really stuck out to me was like this idea of turning Esau's face, right? Like Jacob is finally going to meet Esau again, and Esau has become this brigand, this like bandit leader or whatever, and then Jacob's like sending out caravans in front of him, trying to turn Esau's face. I think Jacob mentioned that this is related to repentance, like in we use metanoia, right? Like metanosis. That's the word for repentance. So I mean, it works in the Greek. I don't know if they use that in the Septuagint, but hey. But yeah, Jacob was mentioning that that's used for our relationship with God. That like we send up these offerings and hope to turn God's face. It's not magic, but hey. I think that's an important idea to have, that like it's not magic, because you get all sorts of zealous ortho bros saying like you need to take communion and it'll solve all your problems. And like no, I don't think communion's magic.
Hocus pocus. Is that where that comes from? I thought I heard that's where that comes from. I could be wrong. Don't quote me on that. Thoughts, John? What were you gonna say something?
No, man, I got nothing. Sherry, that's so interesting what you said about the dream, the telling of the dream actually making it come to pass, and everything not being linear. And that's what makes this whole predestination topic so hard to talk about. And the conclusion that I personally keep coming to time and time again is I feel like my brain can't even wrap around it. Like there's some limit to the human mind that and it's not a great answer, but it's the one I come to a lot. And it's the one I come to a lot in a lot of scripture. And that's both a frustrating thing and a very comforting thing for me. Because you're right, it's not linear.
I do have a question.
Also, I need to go to bed pretty soon because I am falling asleep.
Well, yeah, I probably gotta go too. I still gotta pack. I got a question for you, John, before you go.
Yeah, hit me with it.
So, gosh, how can I frame this? So, it not being linear and all that, and the whole predestination thing. So, all right, I'm trying to gather my thoughts here. So,
no, you're fine.
If it's if the word is spoken, like the dream is spoken, and the word is pronounced, the older shall serve the younger.
Mm-hmm.
How do you escape that? Like, it seems like you're just like, are you predestined at that point? Like, it seems like you're predestined for both, in my mind, because you're gonna be younger than somebody and you're gonna be older than somebody, unless you're Adam. So,
see, I agree with you.
But then you Jacob I loved and Esau I've hated. How do you escape that? Like, I feel like it's kind of they both apply to every individual in some way, it seems like. But I could be, I don't know what rabbit hole I'm going down.
Like that chain just keeps falling down for forever.
Yeah, it's like a pattern, because you'll so God says, even in the idea, I think I mentioned this to you at the cabin one time too, as I was thinking like, what do I do if the word actually is living and it keeps speaking, and God says, I will make a new covenant with them, and I'm like, So what do I do with that?
I remember this.
Like, and what if, because that's the finger I want to point towards Israel or Judaism, and Christians will do that. Say, well, he made a new covenant, so look at you, you're Esau now, we're Jacob, and it's like,
Right.
and it's like, well, that's gonna be you point that finger, and now I'm gonna have three back at me, and I'm like, if that word is living, then what happens when I'm Esau next, and because I'm the older now, and if there is another younger, that should be my younger brother, and how am I going to serve him? So I don't know. I just don't know how to escape that.
Yeah, I think
are you supposed to? Is it?
I don't know that I am. That's what I mean. Even with predestination, it just seems like the word is spoken, and it's and I'm predestined for both, or something like that, and I just have to give thanks.
And
or
I
something.
think
I don't really know.
Honestly, I think this is where like what you're saying makes it resonates with me the most, because what you're saying is it's both, but it was both, and it is both, and it always will be both, because there's no other option. Because that is the character of God woven into the way that the world works.
Well, it sounds to me like you're talking outside of time and space, where everything is happening all at once.
We don't live there, though. We don't live there.
No, we were kind of talking about that a little bit earlier, though, because we were talking about Egypt, and that being the house of bondage, and God saying to Egypt, "Let my people go." There is this way we're kind of still bound in a house of bondage of time and space, and we're crying out, "Let us go," and God is saying, "Let them go."
Yeah.
Right.
And so we're trying to get there. I don't know. It's further up and further in, or something like that.
Something
further
like
out.
that.
Further up and further out. I don't know. However you want to look at it. All right. Well, I probably do have to go.
Yeah.
Because I haven't packed at all. So.
Good luck
I'll
then.
probably have to do it. Yeah.
That'll be
Thanks.
fun.
Where are you traveling?
To Honduras. We're going on a missions trip for like a week. So
nice.
You got to leave in, I think, 4 hours. I have to leave.
Sweet.
So I haven't packed or slept or done anything. So I'm like,
cool. I hope you guys have a great time, man.
Yeah, worst case scenario, there's I think a Walmart there, so I can buy clothes if I forget something. Yeah, it's not that big a deal.
You're fine.
I just need my passport.
Well, thank you guys so much for your time. I didn't have a whole ton to input about predestination specifically, Jason, but I felt like I learned a lot, and that's kind of all I really wanted to do. So
same here.
I'd call it a success.
I guess so. Hopefully Jacob won't mind me commandeering his channel.
We'll see.
As
long as you're not spewing too much heresy, I guess.
Yeah.
It's a very good use of the channel.
I'll blame it on Sherry.
Yeah, that's good. Sherry, it was a pleasure talking to you. I'm going to tap out.
Yeah.
I hope you guys have a good night.
See you, John.
Have a good one.
Do you guys want me to end the broadcast, or do you think you might stick around?
Ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm good sticking on if you want. But hey, up to you.
Okay. I mean, I can leave it. I don't know if it might. Did it end last time? When you?
I've got no idea. Go ahead, try it.
I mean, I think it kept going. I just didn't know if you had the option. I think it ended after you signed off. So I think I assume it'll do the same thing, but I can leave it going. I just didn't know if it gave you the option to end it or not, but I'll leave it going. You can take over from here, and hopefully it won't end on you, but we'll see. All right. Well, thanks for hopping on, Andrew. It was good to see you. Sorry I couldn't stay longer.
No worries.
All right. I'll talk
good
to you
luck
soon.
on that trip, huh? Yep.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, man. See ya.
All right. It didn't end. If we're still on the topic of predestination and whatnot, there's this excellent book by Dostoevsky, and I know Jacob had a Dostoevsky phase, so called Notes from Underground. Great book. Peterson likes it too, in case there's any Peterson fans on. There's an excerpt that I'm trying to remember. I don't know if I can remember it off the top of my head. Goes something like, Dostoevsky has a style that I just can't replicate, but it goes something like, if all my actions could be calculated by twice 2 makes 4, man would curse twice 2 makes 4. He would use all logical proofs on heaven and in earth to argue against twice 2 makes 4. And if you prove to him that in the end twice 2 makes 4 and all his life could be accounted for, he would rid himself of reason. He would curse in a way only man could curse. And if only to say that his actions could not be tabulated. I think Dostoevsky says he is a man and not a piano key. I don't know, it's strange because there's this idea of curses being like illogical. Like they're unnatural, and that's the point. This is the distinguishment between like white magic and black magic, you could say, right? Like white magic is for the good. It's Gandalf, like Gandalf is doing the will of God. And then black magic is like an imposition. It's against the will of God. It's curses. So Dostoevsky does this in a narrative, but he makes the point that like if you posit predestination, man would curse. Read it because Dostoevsky is much more eloquent than I am. I was about to make the point that like we don't live in this grand calculus of the universe type narrative. Even if things were predestined, we would still live our limited lives. And usually when people get into predestination, they get like depressed as heck because they're like, oh, I have no agency. I'm living my little life. What am I doing? Sometimes when it gets to points like that, I think talking about God misses the point. That's all the thoughts I have. I am a known rambler, so I will cut it off here. Have a good night, y'all.